On today's show, Cavs President of Basketball Operations Koby Altman set to meet with the media on Monday. What are the things we need to learn from Koby at his end of season availability? That plus, who should Cavs fans be rooting for the rest of the way in the NBA playoffs? We'll discuss that and so much more on today's edition of Locked On Cavs.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? My name's Danny Cunningham. You might know me from my time covering the Cleveland Cavaliers, places like my Substack, The Inside Shot, Cleveland Magazine, 92.3 The Fan, and a number of other stops along the way. I want to say thank you to you for making Locked On Cavs your first listen today and every day. You can find the show anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else. Drop us a 5-star rating. Leave us a nice review. Be a friend. Tell a friend about Locked On Cavs. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure a friend is subscribed as well. And if you're watching the show on YouTube, do me a favor. Hit that thumbs up button for me. Click subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the latest Locked On Cavs content. A proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's show, of course, brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA. That is LOCKEDON NBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Koby Altman going to meet with the media Monday morning, late Monday morning. So I'm recording this Sunday night. You're listening to this Monday morning. Maybe by the time you're listening to this, Koby has already spoken. I will have a podcast tomorrow with a lot of takeaways based upon what Koby says at this availability. And I am still taking mailbag questions. I have a ton of them. Probably going to do mailbag episodes for the rest of the week after the Koby Altman reaction podcast that'll be on Tuesday. So I've got tons of mailbag questions. This will probably be the only time I do a mailbag for quite some time, probably until July-ish. So if you've got questions, now is the time to get them in. You can drop them in the YouTube comments. You can email them to me at locavsmailbag@gmail.com. Or you can send them to me on social media, and I will try and include as many as I possibly can throughout the rest of the week. But I've gotten so many good questions so far that it's going to be probably at least 3 episodes coming your way. But Koby Altman speaks today, and I think that this is an offseason for Koby that has a lot of pressure on him. I think that there are things that he needs to get right. Just in today's financial climate of the NBA, where the area where the Cavs are going to be financially is pretty restrictive. I think that he does not have a very large window to thread. I think it's a tight needle. He's got to get in there. So I do think that this is something that it's a very, very important offseason. I'm very interested to see how he answers a lot of different questions that are asked of him during this availability. And the first one, and I will be there. I will ask questions. I'm sure others have very similar questions to what I'm about to talk about. But one of the ones that I think is the most important, and I think it's so important because of the way he answered it last year, but one of the ones I think is the most important is, do you still believe that this core four is just that, is a championship caliber core four? Because last year he was asked, I don't remember the exact wording of who asked it, and that's not important. But he was asked if he thought that there could be success if you keep together Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland, Evan Mobley, and Jared Allen. And he, of course, said yes. He said he did not see why those guys couldn't coexist, why they couldn't work together on the floor. And I assume other people didn't necessarily take Koby at his word. And he obviously kept to the truth. Like, he does not have to. When he gets up there, he has to answer questions. He doesn't have to tell the truth. Like, that is the one thing that I do think oftentimes gets lost. Like, coaches, executives, players, they all speak with the media. Nowhere does it says they are required to tell the truth in these settings. And that's fine. That's not an issue. But I didn't think he was in that moment. Obviously, at that time he was, because not only did he keep that group together, he signed 3 of those 4 to contract extensions in Donovan Mitchell, Evan Mobley. Of course, those 2 were no-brainers, but Jared Allen as well got a contract extension last summer, which a lot of people, certainly myself included, did not see coming for a number of different reasons. But I think what his answer is, because he's got a track record of telling the truth on that, how that answer compares to the answer he gave roughly 12 months ago, I think will be a really interesting thing. It is something that I'm very interested to hear because I had doubts at this time last year. And then throughout the regular season this year, I felt as if I had been proven wrong. I thought that the Cavs were going to be at their best with Evan playing more center. And I still don't think that he's physically ready to be only center. I think he needs to be a power forward at times too. I don't think that he can only play center. But if you listen to this podcast last June and July, part of my thinking was that the Cavs will get more out of Evan if he can play center more. And it might be difficult to close games with Jared Allen on the bench. Obviously, the Cavs would do that throughout the season, and that was not that big of an issue. But I do wonder if after another, I don't want to say fully healthy because Darius Garland was very clearly not healthy. Donovan Mitchell was very clearly not healthy. But after another season, another postseason where things end in the same exact spot they did last year, is the belief in that group of players as strong as it was this time a year ago? I didn't agree with it, but I understood believing in it this time 1 year ago. But I do wonder if, okay, we've seen this team, we've seen this group with a new coach. The regular season results cannot be argued with. They were a great regular season team. But ultimately, they fell in the same exact spot that they did the year before. At a certain point, and I don't know if the Cavs think we've gotten to this point, but at a certain point, it becomes, okay, maybe things need to be shaken up right there. And I do think if that's the case, there are two players you look at that could be moved from the core four. You could look at Darius Garland, which I would not do, and you look at Jared Allen, which I would be open to. But what does Koby Altman say about that? Does he think that this core group of players, this core four, should remain together? Be very interested to see how he answers that question, because whether I ask it or somebody else asks it, I'm sure that he's going to get that question on Monday at some point. And that group, as we know, because I just went through that three of them signed contract extensions last year, and Darius Garland signed one prior to that, we know that they're very, very expensive. So this leads me to something that is, I think, a question that has the answer has a little bit less room for gray area. Like, I think this is more of a black and white answer, but it is a very, very important answer that Koby Altman will give. And I think one of the more important ones, but is this organization, I guess I should say, is this organization comfortable being in the second apron next year? And I asked that because as of right now, they are a second apron team. If they don't want to be in the second apron, they need to shed some cash. They're going to be incredibly expensive. They will be one of the most expensive teams in basketball. And every indication that I had gotten during the season is that they were comfortable with that. Well, I also think that was under the impression that they were going to be a team much closer to winning a championship this year than they turned out to be, because they ended up just losing, as I just mentioned, in the same exact game that they did last year. So do I think that they're closer to a title right now than they were this time last year? Absolutely. Like, I think a lot of things went wrong in that second round series against the Pacers, and that's why they lost. And I think the year before, there was not a world in which, if everything went right, I don't think they were beating Boston in that series a year ago. So I do think that they're closer to a title right now, but you have to see results at a certain point, and they're going to be expensive. And I think that if they would have beaten Indy, and I know Boston didn't advance, but let's say they would have lost to Boston in the conference finals, I don't think there would have been question. Yes, you're second apron team, bring everybody back. Boston's going to be a little bit lesser next year. And this was before even the Tatum injury. Like, they were going to have to cut some costs at a certain point, and they were going to take a step back. But that would have been okay, no doubt. Just second apron team. You are who you are. You're opening a window right now. You can't be in that spot forever, but you can be in it right now. And I am curious if the fact that they lost in the second round in 5 games to a team that finished 14 games behind them in the standings changes that, or makes, organizationally makes them have to rethink things. That is something I'm very interested in, because if you want to bring this team back, they're going to be much, much, much more expensive next year than they were this year. Evan Mobley going to cost a lot more money. Donovan Mitchell going to cost more money. Jared Allen does not cost more money. He's still on that $20 million a year flat salary. That'll kick in after this next season. Darius Garland's contract, I believe, costs more money. If you want to retain Ty Jerome, he's going to cost much more money. If you want to keep Sam Merrill, he might cost a little bit more money, probably not a lot more money, but a little bit more money than he did. If you want to keep this group together, they're going to be so much more expensive than they were last year. And if this group didn't get past the second round, is it worth doing? I don't know. I don't know if they know, but that is a question that I'm fascinated to hear what the answer to it is. Because if they think that keeping this core four together, keeping this group of role players together, which I don't think both things should happen. Like if you want to keep the core together, okay, I can understand it. Or if you want to swap out maybe Jarrett Allen and bring in a few high-end role players, like kind of break up his $20 million into potentially another role player or two, and you're going to lose somebody else on the edge. Okay, I get that. But I don't know that bringing back the same team as is something that makes all the sense in the world, especially at the price that it would cost. Now, let's talk about moving those pieces around, because that is another question I have. And then, of course, got to ask about the toughness, because that has been such a talking point from the team that we have to hear what that looks like. We'll do that next right here on Locked On Cavs. Today's show brought to you by Monarch Money. You ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, entertainment, it's easy to lose track, and that's where Monarch Money comes in. They'll be your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money, not just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center where you can track all your accounts, investments, and spending right in one place. You stop just managing your money and start building your wealth. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan for your long-term goals that I know you have. Plus, managing money with your partner smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without all the stress. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDON NBA for half off your first year. Thank you again for making Locked On Cavs your first listen today and every day. Like I said earlier, you can find the show anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else. Drop us a 5-star rating. Leave us a nice review. Be a friend. Tell a friend about Locked On Cavs. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure a friend is subscribed as well. Talked about a few things in the first segment that obviously I think Koby Altman's answers to those questions will be important. I do have a few more things that I think are very interesting to hear what Koby Altman and really just the Cavs as a whole think of heading into what I think is a very, very important offseason for this team. I talked about keeping the core four together, and I also briefly talked about the surrounding pieces. And sort of a follow-up to the core four question, I think, would be, okay, well, if that should stay together, or even if it shouldn't stay together, what needs to happen on the edges? Have we learned enough about role players on this roster, whether or not they are guys that you can win 16 playoff games with? There are, I think, a number of different guys that come to mind. Like, is Ty Jerome somebody that, did you see enough from him in the series against Miami where he was very good versus the series against Indiana where he was very bad? Is Sam Merrill somebody that there is interest in retaining? Should this team be looking into trading guys like Dean Wade and Isaac Okoro? Of course, not all of those guys are going to be individually asked about. At least I'm not anticipating as such. But I do think remaking the roster on the edges is an area where the Cavs could be in the market this offseason, because what they have is not good enough. They need to improve one way or another, whether it's the core, whether it's the supporting cast, whatever it is. Like, this roster, I do think needs to improve in some sense. What sense that is from the Cavs, I think will be a very interesting thing just to see where their line of thinking is. And of course, this is happening on May 19th, and there's still 6 weeks essentially until free agency gets here. So there's a lot of time to kind of do some digging on this stuff. And of course, we don't know exactly who's going to be available when early July rolls around and the new league year flips over. And we don't know what trades are going to be available. And I think that it kind of matters what happens the rest of the postseason with the 4 teams still remaining, as far as who might be available and what things might look like. But I do think that some sort of roster makeover, not obviously a complete overhaul, but I think some sort of roster makeover is something that is without question worth asking about. And then there are 2 other things that are more specific to the series against Indiana that I would love to hear what Koby Altman has to say about. And one of them is, how does a team get tougher? Because we now, in 2 of the last 3 postseasons, I think we've seen the Cavs out-toughed. It happened against New York a few years back. I don't think anyone would disagree with that. And then I didn't necessarily sit there thinking, wow, the Pacers are just out-toughing the Cavs during that series. My prevailing thought was the Cavs forgot how to shoot the basketball. And both those things matter, and I'll get to that in a second. But to hear guys like Max Strus talk about how this team needs to be tougher, one of the questions I then have is, how does a team get tougher? Is it possible for a team to get tougher by going through these experiences? Can they be taught toughness? I've mentioned on a previous episode, I don't think so. I think you might be able to learn toughness. I don't think it gets taught, though. I think you might be able to learn it from past experiences, but is that a risk you're willing to take at this point? Because I don't know how many cracks you're going to have left at this. Is toughness something that solely is acquired, where either you are tougher, you're not? And I think that there are guys on this roster that certainly are, but I do wonder, do you need to acquire more of those pieces? Is that something that should be, when Koby Altman is doing his search for new players on the roster this summer, is that something that should be a prerequisite for any player that joins the Cavs, whether it's via trade or via a free agent signing? I don't know. I think that the answer to how you learn toughness as a basketball team could be a pretty telling answer as far as what the belief there is as to whether or not you need to acquire it or whether it can be taught. Because the Cavs, I sat there and watched the Denver OKC game on Sunday. And the one thing that kept going into my mind was how tough Denver is. Now, Denver was very much, I think, outclassed in that series. I think OKC is a significantly better basketball team than them. But watching Denver scratch and claw and trying to find a way, no matter what, no matter how much the deck was stacked against them, and really even just pushing that to 7 games, because I don't think the Denver Nuggets are a better basketball team than the Cavs. I think if the Cavs and Denver played in a 7-game series, I would pick the Cavs, and I would not have very many second questions about it. I thought that OKC should have beaten Denver in 5 games, but I think Denver, through toughness, found a way to get 2 more games, and they almost won that series. And maybe if Aaron Gordon's hamstring holds up, they do. I don't know. But watching Aaron Gordon play through that, it's like, man, that is some real toughness that team has. Now, ultimately, it wasn't enough, and they have the same fate as the Cavs where they lose in the second round. It's just that they were heavy underdogs that pushed it to 7 games, and the Cavs were heavy favorites and could not get things to a game 6. So I kept thinking about how much toughness matters. Because if you look at the 4 teams left, I don't think there are any questions about toughness. I don't. I think OKC very tough. I think Minnesota's got a toughness about them. I think Indiana, obviously, as in New York, is as well. Maybe New York not as much as they were in previous years, but that's a battle-tested tough group. And I do think there's a certain element of that the Cavs need to find. And how they find it, I think, is an interesting thought process to go through for this Cavs front office. And then the one last question I have, I do think could help us learn a lot. And it is, how much of this specific playoff failure is the result of bad luck? Because none of the injuries that the Cavs dealt with were like errors on their part, right? Like, it's not as if there were these soft tissue issues that you look at and say, yeah, they were probably overworked or they managed things poorly and they have nobody to blame but themselves. Like, Darius Garland's injury was not because of anything the Cavs did wrong. DeAndre Hunter's injury is not because of anything the Cavs did wrong. Donovan Mitchell's ankle injury, not because of anything the Cavs did wrong. Evan Mobley's ankle injury, not because of anything the Cavs did wrong. Like, there is, to some extent, some bad luck baked into that. And then when you add that with the fact that the Cavs could not shoot the basketball and finished horrifically on wide open threes for most of this series, I think there's bad luck baked into that too. That doesn't mean that should be the thing that the franchise falls back on. I don't think it should be, but I do think it matters. I think the injuries do matter. They're not an excuse. They're not why they lost the series, but they're part of the story. I think the wide open 3-point shooting, there's much more into that than just wide open threes, black and white. And they didn't generate enough of them. But I do think there is bad luck baked into that. How much of this series result was bad luck? How much of it was the Cavs were not prepared? How much of it were the Cavs were just outplayed? How much of it, like if you were to break this down into a pie chart of blame, what percentage does luck get? It should not be the majority. I don't even know that it should be second, but it does get some of it. How much of it? That is something I'm very interested in. Now, I mentioned earlier, there are 4 teams left in the NBA playoffs. You've got OKC, you've got Minnesota, you've got Indiana, and you've got New York. If you're a Cavs fan, who are you rooting for? Let's talk through where I think that answer should lie next, right here on Locked On Cavs. Thank you again for making Locked On Cavs your first listen today and every day. You can find the show on YouTube. And if you're watching, do me a favor, hit that thumbs up button for me, click subscribe, hit that notification bell. A reminder to drop mailbag questions in the comments. Going to probably later today record a few mailbag episodes for the rest of the week. So if you want your mailbag questions answered, drop them in the comments, or as I said earlier, you can email them to me at locavsmailbag@gmail.com. As I mentioned, 4 teams remain. The conference finals are set. You've got Oklahoma City taking on Minnesota in the Western Conference, and in the Eastern Conference, just as everybody expected all season long, you have the Indiana Pacers and the New York Knicks. Very predictable stuff on this side. Who should Cavs fans be rooting for? Should they be rooting for the Knicks? I don't think so. I think that would be for Cavs fans, a pretty painful outcome. I think the fact that the Knicks beat the Celtics is a pretty painful thing, or maybe a frustrating thing for Cavs fans, because I do think the Cavs are a better team than the Knicks. The Knicks are tougher, but the Cavs are better, and I think it's by a significant margin. If the Cavs would have beaten the Pacers, I would have picked the Cavs to beat the Knicks in probably 5 games. I think the matchup thing really favors the Cavs. I think the Cavs have higher end talent. Like, I just think that they're the better basketball team. So watching that team potentially win an NBA championship, I think would really leave sort of the taste in your mouth of, man, they let one get away. Like, just a bitter taste. And I think the Pacers is a little bit of the same thing, because I do think, as I mentioned with the bad luck at the end, you could potentially feel as if, man, the Cavs got unlucky and that's why they didn't win the title. I don't think that would be entirely correct, but I can't say that's entirely wrong either. Then you get to the Western Conference, and I think when you are a fan of a team in the East, it's much easier to root for the team in the West to win the title. And I think when you're a fan of the team in the West, it's much easier to root for a team in the East to win the title. So I think that, New York and Indy, if you're a Cavs fan, you're probably not rooting for either of those teams, right? You're probably rooting for one of OKC and Minnesota. I think OKC is the team that you should be rooting for if you're a Cavs fan. Now, I'm not going to tell you what to do. You can root for whoever you want, but I think OKC is the one that probably makes the most sense. And I think that because the Thunder were kind of in the same position the Cavs were in last year. And they were the 1 seed in the Western Conference. They won, I believe, 58 games last year. They were a great regular season team. They get to the second round, and they lose to the Dallas Mavericks, who were the number 5 seed. And that Thunder team was younger than this Cavs team is, had a bright future, and I still believe in the Cavs' future. Like, I still think the Cavs have a very bright future despite this postseason failure. And they needed to get tougher. They needed to be a team that got tougher. Now they needed to improve in some other areas, just as I think the Cavs can improve in some other areas, but they needed to add some toughness to their roster. And they did just that. They added toughness. They added Alex Caruso, tough. They added Isaiah Hartenstein. Part of the reason why I think the Knicks struggled for most of this year is they lost some of that toughness when Isaiah Hartenstein left them in free agency for Oklahoma City. They added toughness, and they are, I think, a much tougher group than what they were 12 months ago. And I think that's why they won Game 7 over Denver. I think that's why they're in the Western Conference this year after they weren't last year. I think defensively, what they're capable of doing is something that the Cavs should be striving to be next year. I think next year it's going to be very important for the Cavs to be a better defensive team from start to finish. I don't care if they're the number one offense in the league or not. I think they need to be top 5 in defense. And I think that was an area where probably raised a few more red flags than some people would have liked to admit. I think OKC is the team to root for too, because if you want to feel better about the Cavs failing, and there's not a nice way to say what happened in the playoffs, they failed, and you watch the one team that was actually a better team than the Cavs all year long in OKC win it, I do think if you're a fan, you can kind of say, well, OKC was just the best team anyways. Like, even if the Cavs would have gotten to the finals, I probably would have picked OKC to beat them. I think OKC is the best team in basketball. They've been the best team in basketball for most of the year. I probably would have picked them to win the finals over the Cavs. I know I would have picked them over Boston, over anybody else that came out of the East. Now, Minnesota can beat them, certainly. I think OKC will win that series. I think OKC will end up winning the finals. But I do think if you're a Cavs fan and the team that was actually better than the Cavs all year is the one that won the finals, I feel like that doesn't necessarily take away some of the pain that you're probably feeling from this playoff failure. But I do think it says, okay, you know what? We might not have won it anyways. I think it feels if Minnesota or New York or Indiana wins the finals, it feels like a much, much bigger missed opportunity than if OKC wins it. And I think for like the sports fans' mental health, that might be the best thing to do. Doesn't erase the failure the Cavs had, because they did have just that. But I think it might be better for your mental health if you do root for OKC. Now, maybe you just don't want to watch anyone win. I understand that too. But I think OKC is probably the pick if you're a Cavs fan. I expect them to win the title. I think they're the best team. What they're able to do defensively, very, very, very impressive. Koby Altman, as I mentioned, is speaking on Monday. I will Tuesday morning, for your first listen, have reaction, thoughts, everything from his availability. I think there are a lot of interesting questions as I laid out throughout the course of this episode, and we will dive into a lot of those answers on tomorrow's Locked On Cavs. Then the rest of this week is going to be mailbags. I've got at least 3 episodes worth of mailbags. Maybe I'll squeeze 4 episodes in the rest of the week, but this is your chance to ask questions about the season that was, the offseason upcoming, basically anything Cavs related that you want. This is your chance. I'm not going to probably do this again until after free agency is done. So if you want to do this, this is the opportunity. You can comment on this video if you're watching on YouTube. You can tweet your questions, blue sky your questions, whatever those are called, my way, or you can email them, locavsmailbag@gmail.com. I will do my best to get to every single question that I have, but make sure you get them in by, let's say, 5:30 Monday afternoon. That if a question comes in after that, no promises I can get to it, but if it comes in before that, I will do my very best to get to it. So thank you again for making Locked On Cavs your first listen today and every day. Like I said earlier, you can find the show anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else. Drop us a 5-star rating. Leave us a nice review. Be a friend. Tell a friend about Locked On Cavs. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure a friend is subscribed as well. And if you're watching the show on YouTube, as we get out of here, do me a favor. Hit that thumbs up button for me. Click subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the latest Locked On Cavs content. I'll be back tomorrow talking more about the Cavs.